Maestro stepped his foot out of the contents of the man's stomach and said, "Well, that's charming." He was seemingly oblivious to his surroundings. These bodies too were in a state of disarray, being mutilated like the others down the hill. Dieter frowned and spoke cold and clinically. "The corpses have not been here for long. The blood is not dry everywhere yet. It looks like some wild creatures have eaten them." Tobias replied, "But death! No pack of animals would be large enough to consume so much, so widespread in so little time." Dieter snarled, "It's death, you pompous fool! And no, it couldn't have been a normal pack of animals, such as wolves. But I can tell you this much. The beastmen were indeed here." Dieter pointed at a nearby corpse. There they saw a dead beastman. As their view went wider, they saw more of the foul Chaos Children littering the streets, but most of them had died in the fields of barley that faced onto the road. "So there has been a battle between the two," said Maestro. "Indeed," replied Dieter, "and the beastmen were heavily outnumbered. But the beastmen did not eat these men. Look." Dieter had walked over to a beastman corpse and pointed to it. As they got closer, they saw that it too had been eaten similarly. Rysandria had never been surrounded by so much death. She stared in dismay at the loss of life, considering the pain and suffering wrought here. Maestro's expression became panicked. "If something has killed or eaten them both, then you can guarantee we would fit the bill for a tasty snack," Tobias jokingly remarked. "Yes, and if they ate you, Maestro, your staff would make a handy toothpick for afterwards." Maestro glared at the halfling. "Oh, really? Well, at least they wouldn't be drawing for the shorter straw of who gets to eat me, unlike you." Tobias spluttered. "I'll have you know I have lots of meat on me. I eat good food, and the fat would be tasty. Then he commented, "Why are we arguing about this?" Tordrad had gotten the gist of the conversation and commented in his native tongue, "Over my dead body will they eat you, wizard." Then Tordrad realized what he had said, and he felt disgusted with himself. It depressed him to have to say that. He commented as an afterthought, "But they can eat halfling all they want. I might eat him as snack yet. He's so small. But perhaps there'll be good fight for me soon, yes?" Maestro and Tobias simply stared at Tordrad as they saw him mutter something in Kislevian, laugh, and take a swig of vodka. Tobias reckoned that Tordrad was definitely an alcoholic. Maestro smiled politely and said, "Yes, Tordrad, I do indeed deem this area too unsafe to remain in any longer. Whatever did this might return." "We can't continue in me coach, though, Gov," said Samuel. He looked pathetic, with a little vomit on his collar. "It'd never get over all the bodies. The only way round is through the field, and as you can plainly see, it's filled with beastmen bodies. We'd end up losing a wheel or a horn or something." Rysandria had finally finished administering prayers for the bodies around her. She frowned with exhaustion and said, "As much as it feels inadvisable, I think we need to move onwards on foot, and quickly at that." So it was decided. Together they walked down the pathway, keeping just inside the forest, so that they could take cover by the massive trees here if need be. Dieter stretched his mind out as if connecting with the land itself. Something etheric blazed inside him, and suddenly he could feel the vibration through the soles of his feet. He didn't know how, because he had cast no spell knowingly. Through the vibrations he could feel the party that walked beside him, yet there was something else. Further back, much further back behind them were lots of vibrations. He recognized the vibrations of 2 feet of a person walking, for the group with him set the norm, yet something felt different about the vibrations he felt some way away. He was sensing 2 feet in a normal stepping formation, yet there was an extra property connecting with the ground too, a sort of banging, scraping. Perhaps a body being dragged behind someone, he thought. This feeling was multiplied by many, however. He also perceived the vibrations of 4 feet too. He remained quiet about all of this. Soon they could smell fire. The further south they went, the stronger it became. They soon determined that its source lay somewhere deeper in the forest, but not far. They came to a decision to head in and check it out. They would only look. Dieter and Olga took the frontal position and walked far ahead of the others as he scouted, almost out of sight. After 8 minutes of walking, they could see he had stopped and crouched beside some shrubbery to view something. They were finally catching up when he waved them to him, and he stepped onwards confidently. As the others emerged, they saw a hamlet, a tiny area of 3 houses surrounded by trees. Tobias commented aloud that there was no such place on the map. Rysandria put forward that perhaps the map makers didn't feel 3 houses important enough to list.
In theory, then, said Maestro, if this place doesn't officially exist, it should be safe.
Ha! Said Dieter sardonically, as he nodded towards the scene unfolding ahead in the forest clearing that served as the hamlet's village square. In the square, a burning pyre had been prepared, and 4 men were harassing a young woman. They had encircled her, leaving her no way of escape. They laughed amongst themselves at her torment. Maestro commented,
Unbelievable! What is it with these people? Keep trying to burn everyone!
But his tone didn't indicate that he wanted to try and stop it. Everyone assumed he did, though, and they moved forwards. Maestro didn't want to be left behind, so he pressed on as well. The 4 men and the young woman were on a raised, stone square-shaped platform that had 2 sets of steps that ran a short way up to it. Maestro had appeared behind one of the men, looking over his shoulder with interest.
Gosh, he started. Is this a private meeting, or is anyone invited? Where's the buffet?
The men mostly ignored Maestro, except for one who answered him. We were gonna burn this witch. We thought she was one of us, normal and decent, but then she changed. Then she became a magical freak. We can't leave her to become a witch. Seeing Maestro's surprise, the man added, It's for all our sakes. It's a matter of public safety. Dieter stepped forward suddenly and barged in between the men.
You're damned right it's a matter of public safety. If you try and burn that young woman, none of you will be safe. Understand?
The men paused at this, but still kept their composure, even when they spotted the rest of the party walking up the steps. Tordrad's visor was still down, so they missed out on the expression on his face, for he recognized an element of his own people in the girl, who he estimated to be around 17. Perhaps she is Kislevian, he wondered. Maestro focused on his witch sight and was able to see the magical aura around the young girl. By all accounts, her powers had just broken out, and these men were persecuting her. Something seemed different about the energies around her body, however, something that Maestro had never seen before. Ice! It looked just like small icicles falling off of her body. Rysandria stepped forward and spoke. Gentlemen, though you are deprived of the learning and laws of the big cities, you must try to comprehend. Those who are found to be magically gifted are shown the way into the colleges of magic. They are given a chance to avoid hedge wizardry and serve the Empire.
Indeed, butted in Tobias, as was authorized by the elves 2 centuries ago in the time of Emperor Magnus the Pious. They allowed humans to practice magic in safer ways, where colleges were founded, as they mentored the Empire's fledgling years of a new age.
Too many fancy-filled words, said one man. But we don't care about what any scrawny elves said, boasted another of the men. That load of stuck-up, tight-lipped plonkers. Look, this ain't the city. Maestro bit his lip to stop himself agreeing with them on their last point about the elves. It was fine, he reasoned. The elves felt the same way about him, too. Tordrad flexed his fingers and limbered his body up for a fight. Even this did not put the men off. Rysandria came back at them. The Empire military is having to divert precious forces to policing the rural areas just so that this sort of thing doesn't happen. What are they wasting their resources for if you would simply take the law into your own hands? One of the men seemed persuaded by this. It was clear on his face, but not the others. Maestro looked carefully at the young girl and squinted one eye as he asked,
You don't have a particular love of engineering, do you?
The young lady looked at him confused. Maestro elaborated.
You know, spanners, wrenches, oil, gunpowder, wires, flux, cogs, things exploding and nearly blowing your eyebrows off, that sort of thing.
The girl looked at him in a shocked manner, momentarily considering the wizard more warily than the men who were threatening her, then quickly shook her head to indicate no.
Ah, good,
answered Maestro.
Very good. Well, in that case, young lady, I am to see you are trained by the colleges of magic.
Maestro waved a finger in an upward spiral into the air full of self-importance. Tobias shook his head in consideration of Maestro's foolish reasoning for his point. Maestro was used to seeing people do this, so paid it no mind. He simply continued.
I am now a master wizard of my order. I have the power to introduce you to the collegiate. I have the power to train you myself, even.
The men became interested in Maestro at last, looking him from toe to head as if looking at him for the first time. One said, "Ah, so you're no good trouble-making wizard, are you? I can believe it. You look the part."
"Thank you,"
replied Maestro. Tobias rolled his eyes at how right the men's description actually was, even though they were trying to be offensive. "Not much of one, though," came another of the men. "He don't look like much." "True enough," agreed another of the men. "And after we've done with this girl, you'll be next on the pyre if you don't leave, wizard." The men laughed and scoffed at the skinny frame of the man standing in front of them. A look of stern concentration came across Maestro's face. The winds of magic pulled and swelled around him like a vortex of power. Winds began to kick up around the men, seemingly concentrated around the wizard. Quickly the wind increased in strength, blowing Maestro's robes and hair about magnificently. The men reckoned they could see Maestro begin to grow in size somehow. In actual fact, he was slightly levitated off of the ground. The men saw Maestro's angered eyes alive with electricity running through them, with a stare that threatened to tear them apart. At last, with this demonstration of great power and seasoned control, noted Tobias, the men began to back away from the girl. The young lady herself even turned and considered moving away from the wizard. She fancied that he looked like he could explode with energy at any moment, but she held her ground, trembling a little as Maestro's clenched teeth showed. A calming but small hand rested upon the wizard's arm. It was Tobias. Where the halfling made contact, the magical build-up in that exact spot subsided. Maestro began to calm down at the reassuring touch and look in Tobias's eyes. The men stared at Maestro, then over his shoulder at the others in the party. Dieter's eyes were most disturbing to look at. His pupils were dilated, and his sickening sneer spoke of cruelty they could never imagine. Rysandria too could feel it, and the hairs on the back of her neck began to stand on end. Rysandria put a hand out and gestured for the young girl to come to her. She did as requested and stood by Rysandria's side. An excited chittering sound grabbed all of their attentions as they looked out towards a section of forest on the outskirts of the hamlet. Swarms of rats swept forward like a purpose-driven wave of brown water along the ground. Their red eyes were fixed as they swept towards their goal so quickly that they tripped over each other along the way. Everyone gasped in horror at the sight of thousands of rats together coming at them. Suddenly more squeaking gave way, rats emerging from the other side of the hamlet, cutting off any chance of retreat that way. As the rats neared, the men began running, as a terrible shrill squeaking sound gave away a new threat, that of a Skaven pack master, leading 6 gigantic rats, unnaturally larger than rats had any right to be, and they were heading straight towards those assembled in the hamlet. As the villagers ran, Rysandria held the young woman in place as rats swarmed over 2 of them, who fell to their knees, screaming from multitudes of tiny bites all across their bodies. The shrill crack of the 13-tailed packmaster's whip, each section ending in warpstone, reminded everyone else of the true danger coming up. The other 2 men ran for all they were worth and went back into their houses. The sound of clicking locks and sliding bolts across doors confirmed that the adventurers were going to be getting no help from them.